Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with me, Murray, your weekly escape into ancient warfare-related material to get away from whatever's happening in your everyday life. What I do here is I attempt to answer a question from a reader, viewer, or listener, sometimes come up with the correct answer. Of course, you can ask us a question. You can send us a postcard. I believe I've lost one from Portugal. I believe it never arrived, so I'm sorry about that. If it does turn up, I will definitely let you know. You can, of course, comment on a previous video or podcast. You can send us an email, all sorts of things like that. Murray@caravansaraipublishers.com will get to me. Anyway, today's question, and of course you can back us at Patreon at one of three different levels. Today's question is from CliosPaintingBench. Would like to ask a question, if possible. What do you think are the most visually distinct and impressive ancient warfare armies outside of the ones most audiences would know? We'll get to that in a minute. Firstly, though, I've got an addendum, which is unusual. I don't think I've had an addendum before. A previous Ancient Warfare Answers was on the disappearance of the 9th Legion, and I waxed lyrical about how I thought that it could be that the 9th Legion and the 22nd Legion were both lost in 161 at the beginning of Lucius Severus's Parthian War. Now, my rabbit hole didn't end, and of course, one of the things there is that we have Lucian and Cassius Dio, telling us about the annihilation of a legion or an army, but we don't have anyone telling us about the loss of legions, plural, or 2 legions. Aha, but we do. So I was reading, again, as you do sometimes, the biography of Lucius Verus in the Historia Augusta, the SHA, and in chapter 6.9, it talks about while a legate was being slain, while legions were being slaughtered. So not that I want to rely on the SHA, because it's normally regarded as a poor source, but it talks about legions being slaughtered, and that therefore I think puts another bit of evidence into the idea that Severianus, the governor of Cappadocia, loses 2 legions, and that I think the best candidates for those are the 9th and the 22nd, that the 12th and the 15th, which before the 160s are stationed in Cappadocia, and after the 160s are stationed in Cappadocia, I think they come back in. But anyway, that's my addendum. Now, today, visually distinct. Well, there's a couple of candidates, and I think probably the best starting point for visually distinct armies is Herodotus's description of the army of Xerxes in Book 7, where he talks about all of the different equipment that they have. There's one of those that I love the description of, which we'll get to. But of course, there are others as well. And my favorite, you'll have to wait till the end of this 10 minutes to find out who my favorite is, but I'll get there. Now, so of course, in Book 7, Chapter 61, you've got the description of the Persians, their equipment. They wore on their head loose caps called tiaras, and on their bodies sleeved tunics of diverse colors, purples, whites, yellows, reds, although all of those different colors I think there's blues as well, we get from a whole different range of sources, Ctesias, Xenophon, and several others. They tell us the colors that were worn and whether those colors actually represent a particular unit within the Persian army, which is perhaps the beginnings of uniform, in the sense of an actual uniform tunic color. Generally speaking, of course, with other armies, you've got equipment, which marks them as being from a particular culture, and Herodotus is the same. But the idea that a particular color of tunic represents a particular unit is something, of course, we associate with military history. We often associate it with Spartans, red, and we often associate it with the Roman legions, red. In both cases, probably wrong. We know that the Spartans had red cloaks, but weren't necessarily wearing red tunics. And red being the only color that Roman legionaries have, of course, is a debate all of its own, and certainly not one I can deal with in 10 minutes. But we know that there are other colors more likely than just red. Anyway, so then we've got scales of iron, similar appearance to the scales of a fish, and short pants on their legs. Short pants is interesting because we do, of course, know that they wore long trousers as well. For shields, they had wicker bucklers, their quivers hanging beneath these. Now, that, interestingly, is similar to what we see in the Persepolis and other places where Persian troops are shown. They carried short spears. Interestingly, we think that the short Persian spear is about the same length as a dory, but the dory might be slightly longer. Long bows and arrows of reed, daggers, that's the akanakes, that hang from the belt by the right thigh, which of course is a sword, not a dagger, but to a Greek. Mind you, it's the same length as the Xiphos sword. Interesting. Anyway, okay, so that's them. Then the Medes are equipped like the Persians. The Kissians are armed like the Persians, but they wore turbans, not caps. Assyrians wore on their head helmets of twisted bronze, made in an outlandish fashion, not easy to describe. Bore shields and spears and daggers of Egyptian fashion, and wooden clubs studded with iron. Is beginning to get visually interesting. Bactrians wore headgear similar to the Medians, carrying native bows of reed and short spears. The Sakians, who were Scythians, wore on their heads tall caps, erect and stiff with a tapering point, wore short pants, native bows, and axes, which they call the sagaris. Now, yes, Indians wore garments of tree wool. Not exactly what sure tree wool is, and pretty sure that's not what the Indians of the ancient world wore. Carried bows of reed and iron-tipped arrows of the same. Yes. Aryans equipped with medians. Yes, 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 yes. So you keep going through all of these. Now, to me, the southern Ethiopians are perhaps the most visually striking of all of the units that Herodotus describes. That's in chapter 69. The Ethiopians, the southern Ethiopians, wore the skins of leopards and lions. They carried bows made of palm wood strips that were 4 cubits long in full and carried short arrows pointed not with iron, but with a sharpened stone, the type of stone used to carve seals. Moreover, they had spears pointed with gazelle's horn and sharpened to the likeness of a lance, and studded clubs in addition. When they went into battle, they painted half their bodies with gypsum and the other half with vermilion. So you've got white and red. So they probably are the most striking army that I think that's described in Herodotus, and up there for most striking in the ancient world in general. Herodotus goes on, talks about the northern Ethiopians, those are the ones, and the Arabians, who differ only in their hair. One has straight hair, one has the woolliest hair of anyone. And they wore on their heads, this is the what he describes as the Ethiopians of Asia. So that's the northern Ethiopians. They wore on their heads the skins of horses' foreheads, stripped from the head with ears and mane. The mane served them for a crest, and they wore the horses' ears stiff and upright. So that is a particularly odd image in our heads. The Paphlagonians had plated helmets. I wonder whether that's the skull cap that we get in several Greek reenactors talking about the cap that's worn underneath the helmet rather than in a helmet itself. And then he goes on and on and on. Now, the southern Ethiopians is up there. You've got the Colchians wore wooden helmets, peculiar wooden helmets. Again, if they did wear wooden helmets, those won't survive in the archaeological record particularly well. One of the things, of course, about Herodotus is that for all of this amazing description that we get in Herodotus, it's interesting that on several occasions, whether it be the marmosets that are the gold-digging ants, or the description of the hippopotamus, or the discovery of the boats at the bottom of the Black Sea that concur with his description, I think one of the things that's very foolish for us to do is to criticize and say that Herodotus is wrong, because more often than not, we make a discovery thousands of years later after Herodotus has stopped writing, which actually proves that actually he was not far off being right. So I think you've got to be very wary of just dismissing Herodotus as out of hand. There's a very cool description of the Sagatians in chapter 85, because he says that they carry no armor of bronze or iron except daggers, but that they fight using ropes of twisted leather. In these they trust when they go into battle. This is their manner of fighting. When they are at close quarters with their enemy, they throw their ropes, which have a noose at the end. Whatever they catch, be it horse or man, the thrower drags it to himself, and the enemy entangled in this way in the coils is killed. Now that's fascinating, because Ammianus Marcellinus later describes the nooses of twisted rope that the Huns use in battle. So it's a very interesting correlation. Are the Sagatians, who are a nomad tribe, but they are described by Herodotus as being Persian in speech, are they actually similar to that. Anyway, that's not, however, my favorite description of an ancient army that is visually distinct. I think that has to, and probably as a sign of what I've been reading mostly recently, that's a description of the cataphract or clibinarius of the Parthian, the Sassanid Persians, and there's obviously pictures of them on Trajan's column, and of course descriptions of them all over the place in the Notitia Dignitatum. But there's a really cool description of them in a very unexpected source, and that is in one of Libanius's orations. Libanius is a 4th century AD sophist living in Antioch, and he has multiple orations which have little clues about the Battle of Adrianople, for instance, or Julian's campaigns. And in this case, he's describing a panegyric. This is a panegyric to Constantius and Constans, the two brother emperors in the mid-4th century. This is from AD 349, and he talks about Sassanid Persian cavalrymen, which is, of course, the cataphract or the clibinarius, that their armour was aimed to make cavalry practically invulnerable. For he did not limit their armour to helmet, breastplate, and greaves in the ancient manner, nor to placing bronze plates before the head and chest of the horse alone, but he caused the rider to be covered in protective armour from his head to his toes, and the horse from its crown to the tips of its hooves, with a space left only open for their eyes to see what was happening, and for breathing holes to avoid asphyxiation. So the visually striking, and if you're going to game these, very quick to paint idea of cavalry that are covered in head to toe in armor, in overlapping plates or banded armor, depending on how you want to do it. So these bronze men are probably the most visually striking, and of course, if it was shone, then they would gleam on the battlefield. So I think that's, for me, the most sort of visually striking. And second are the southern Ethiopians, according to Herodotus. So I hope that answers your question, and that is indeed my idea on, firstly, my addendum on the 9th Legion, and secondly, on which is the most visually striking army of the ancient world. Join me again for another Ancient Warfare Answers. Thanks. Bye.